we seem to be representing a city, which is, of course, a very daunting task. I guess we will, be a bit more modest in our ambitions and each perform a different role. I think Chini and I will talk about two exhibition projects at Parasite that are to a certain extent relevant for a type of engagement that we do through this particular medium of exhibition making. And then Samson and Giorgio will speak precisely about the project that is developed with Parasite in the framework of the overarching program that brought us here today. There's not much time, so it's quite an intricate narrative, like behind the exhibition that I want to introduce, very much befitting the long and convoluted title that we gave it. It's the exhibition at General of the Plague Year, which was co-curated in 2013 with Inti Guerrero, came about from our interest of trying to make sense of a number of overarching narratives and issues that were part of the public sphere and of the debates in the city around the year of the exhibition 2013. One of the first intentions was to try to understand what are the competing periodizations of that contemporary moment in Hong Kong. What kind of genealogies of these different narratives can be understood, and how do they interact with each other? Hong Kong, of course, lives under the obvious legacy of 1997, the year of the handover of the former British colony to the mainland China, and of course, the looming deadline of the first 50 years that are being warranted under the Sino-British Accords for maintaining the current situation in Hong Kong, so 2046. But around these two dates, there are other dates and other moments where different collisions and different moments of tensions erupt. And in 2013, the most obvious such moment was the year 2003, where several things have happened coincidentally in the history of the city. On one hand, there was the SARS crisis, one of the most significant epidemics in contemporary times. It was also like a disease that had no precedent and had no. It was completely unknown in a regnum of bacteria and of pathogenic agents, and for at least the first 2 months, which was the real moment of crisis in Hong Kong, the mortality level and its capacity to spread was also unknown. So. It was the perfect metaphor for an absolute spectrum of fear. Now, the main interest point was to identify with this exhibition the imagery and the vocabulary of fear that was generated during this moment of crisis, during these 2 months of quarantine and shutdown of normal life of the city, and to identify the repercussions of those imagery and of that vocabulary in the decade that succeeded it, and particularly in the way in which it was used to substantiate and to describe other horizons of fear, primarily the one that dealt with the fear of contamination, both political and cultural, from mainland China in regards to Hong Kong. Now, there is a very particular reason, and there's a very particular calendaristic moment that made this connection, because the economic meltdown of the 2 months of the quarantine in Hong Kong, when the real estate market was down and where the stock exchange was down. So the state of exception that completely froze one of the major centers of global capitalism. So that economic meltdown was tackled by the Hong Kong government with the first measure, which was to allow citizens of mainland China to enter Hong Kong on individual visas for the first time. And this particular measure was one of the most impactful measures ever taken by the Hong Kong government, and it had profound effects on the economy, the society in Hong Kong. So basically from a few tens of thousands mainland Chinese that came on organized tours before 2003, last year we had something like 57 million a year. Now, an entire reaction of essentially xenophobia and of a number of other connected reactions appeared in these last 10 years. And the interest of the exhibition was basically to see how the imagery and the vocabulary of fear, the representation of pathogenic agents during that moment of crisis was then employed with minimal mutations to describe the looming invasion of mainland Chinese in Hong Kong. Now, this was one of the consequences of the SARS crisis. Now, the second consequence, a slightly more gracious one, was that. So not to move the microphone. Okay, was that as a counter reaction to that mandated moment of quarantine, to that imposed atomization of society, where your neighbor, the one next to you, was a potential agent of your own demise. At the very end of that crisis, something unexpectedly happened as well, and something relatively unprecedented in the history of Hong Kong. Profiting from that moment of crisis and of everyone's attention being focused on the disease, Hong Kong government also tried to pass a very controversial security law in that moment. The unexpected reaction was that unprecedented large-scale demonstrations started in Hong Kong at the time that culminated with one of the largest rallies ever on the 1st of July 2003. That's also the date of the handover. And that is very much the beginning of a pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong that, of course, had a culmination that most of you would have heard last year with the Umbrella Revolution that also fundamentally affected Hong Kong. And if we would be to reassess this issue of the genealogy of the contemporary moment in Hong Kong, the year 2014 would obviously have a major position as well. So the SARS crisis, that moment of fear that had two competing but not completely separated consequences, one being the impetus that it gave to the pro-democracy movement, the other one being the creation of a particular imagery of alienation and otherizing, and to a certain extent dehumanizing the other in this case being primarily the mainland Chinese citizenry and visitors. Now, this was, I'm still at the very, very basic introduction of the premises of the project, but this is one of the first structures. Now, what we also tried to do with the project, and that was very important, was to try to find a historical precedent to this association of fear of contagion on an epidemiological level and on a racial level as well, on a xenophobic level. And another very important moment in the history of Hong Kong is the 1894 plague. That actually eventually spread to India and caused a real catastrophe here with a much higher order of magnitude of victims than in Hong Kong. However, Hong Kong is very important in these epidemics, not just because it is where it originated, but because it is in Hong Kong where the bacillus that had caused the plague for the past millennium and a half in Europe and Asia was identified. So in 1894, a Swiss and a Japanese doctor identified the culprit of one of the deadliest killers in human history. And 1894 is already an era of global press and global media to a certain extent. So that news actually makes international headlines around the world. And very soon, this identification in Hong Kong is read through a racist pattern, which is, of course, that of associating the disease with Asians. This also had like a much longer history in Europe, where there was always a suspicion that it was the Mongols who brought the plague in Europe, and it's a complicated story. But this particular narrative fit impeccably to the largest horizon of fear in the Western world at the end of the 19th century, which was this formation of the Yellow Peril. A fear of a growing Asia that was a complex racist construction that was concerned both with the high number of Chinese, basically, and with the Chinese being willing to work for no money and to take the jobs of good Western working men. So a very similar narrative and discourse with the one that we would hear today. Of course, it was nevertheless addressed to the Chinese who were immigrants in the Western world. So the outsourcing economy was not yet so developed, but otherwise the basic structure, the fear of the Chinese, of this agent, because of their multitudes, of this incomprehensible number of anonymous and similarly looking individuals, was part of this Yellow Peril complex. The other one being, of course, the rise of Japan as a military and economic power. And you know, the 1905 is another important moment in this history of fear, when Japan defeats Russia, and then being the first moment in modern times when a non-European country defeats in war a European power. Of course, you know, this whole horizon of fear comes from, you know, the West's inability to conceive at that point that the great interconnected civilization of that era could implode because of a conflict in between European countries. That was something that they could not conceive. So this necessary horizon of fear that every society seems to be fabricating had to come from the outside. So Asia was the perfect victim. Anyway. This was an important point as well in our narrative, this association of that moment of disease with a moment of racism, with the migration of imagery and of vocabulary from one side of the spectrum of fear to the other. And in this research process, we actually identified a lot of common points that actually circulated from the 1894 moment to the 2003 one. There was also a longer history, even before 1894, that was part of the exhibition, and that was about Hong Kong's status as a test case in the British Empire for a particular understanding of disease and of contagion. I don't have a lot of time to enter into that, but basically, throughout the 19th century, there was one of the biggest scientific debates that also had a very strong political dimension, very similar to how the debate about global warming works today, and that was about how disease is spread. Yes, and one was that disease is spread from individuals to individuals, and this was, you know, believed by the individuals who this was the contagion theory, and the way in which this process happened had various explanations. In the first part of the 19th century, various fanciful ideas, were put forward, and then there were the ones who believed that disease doesn't spread from individuals, but it's intrinsic to a place. A place has miasmas that infect other people. And of course, these two visions had economic implications, because when you believe in contagion, you believe that there needs to be quarantine, and when quarantine is in place, trade doesn't flow so freely. So perpetrators or the ones who benefited the most from global free trade also had a stake in believing that there's no such thing as contagion, but places are intrinsically, miasmatically sickening. The British Empire was, of course, the biggest beneficiary of free trade in the 19th century, so they needed, a test case. And to a large extent, Hong Kong was this place where they tried to prove that Hong Kong is a place that is intrinsically sick and, perpetrator of diseases. So yeah, there was this incredible historical baggage that is an important part of Hong Kong's identity. And the exhibition's point was to try to analyze this recurrence and to look at the startling reality that this is still being employed, and we're now in a situation where, and part of the Chinese nation in Hong Kong is perpetrating the same racist myth, against another part of the Chinese nation. There was another, just to mention it, there was another chapter of the exhibition which dealt with a completely different realm, and that was the death of a very important icon in Hong Kong, Leslie Cheung, who committed suicide at the height of the crisis of the SARS crisis, and he's a very important figure for a number of reasons. He's actually the first pan-Asian, or at least pan-East Asian icon that managed to, go beyond the borders of different popular cultures. So he's the first star that was not a Western star, or not just a local star. He's also so he's part of a long process of creating a sense of consciousness in the pop cultural realm that is not tributary to a Western-centric vision. He's very important for Hong Kong because in many ways he's also a symbol of an old Hong Kong that was at the time dying and at the time, mutating into different Hong Kong, let's put it that way. But also what we tried to show with the exhibition was that he was also in many ways manipulated as a pawn in a very complicated process of cultural handover of Hong Kong to mainland China. And a certain versatility of his persona. He was also queer, but also a very multifaceted actor. So the versatility of his roles played a very interesting role in defining what Hong Kong is becoming. So his own versatility as a major Hong Kong icon reflected, but also enhanced the versatility of Hong Kong's own versatility in its different identities that it had in the last decades. So I'm almost ready, just 2 minutes, because just about the exhibition, because it was very important for us that this was not an essay. There was, I think when we do exhibitions, it's very important to answer the first question: why does this exhibition need to come into the world? Why, whatever urgencies we might identify and whatever the theoretical construct we might want to communicate, why does this need to take the form of an exhibition? Why can't this take another form of organizing knowledge or of producing knowledge? And we believe, rightly or wrongly, that we often answer this question with specific answers. There were particular strategies that we employed when we constructed this show. I would just want to mention one, and then I finish, is that the exhibition, it is a traveling show, so this is an image not from Parasite, but from Cadiz in San Francisco. in the narrative of the exhibition, in the unfolding of information and of narratives, there were several moments of rupture that were necessary to fight basically the various strategies and scenarios of dehumanization that were being put forward. And one of such moments was the display of a particular type of performative practices from various parts of, well, in the original show it was from different Asian contexts, but then in San Francisco we also included some instances that were pertinent to Latin America and North America, of practices that basically employed the artist putting forward his or her own human body forward as a way of empowering an individual. So there was this particular tension that was not only present within the narrative that we try to demonstrate, but was also present between the different situations and strategies that one would encounter in the show. So yes, sorry for running over. Yeah.